So these are kind of examples of personal testimonies or personal accounts. Is there any again, back to the question, is there any way to test for that? I know there was a study done a couple of years ago about the power of prayer, and specifically on, I believe, heart patients in an ICU or coronary care unit. And that study, the result of that study was that these prayers didn't actually do anything for the patients. Now, how do you explain that, or what's...
Well, since I didn't even bother to look in, I heard it, in the media, but if I'm like you, I don't trust the media greatly, right? So I didn't bother to check who'd done the study or whatever. But my own experience is that if we have a need and it's a legitimate one, it's got nothing to do with me making money, right? I will take it to God, and He has faithfully provided from then until now. There was one other component in me becoming a Christian, which I haven't shared, and that is that one of my relatives had a baby, and the baby was sick, put into hospital, and the doctors said, look, we can't do any more, take it home, it's going to die. And so they called in this person who, they'd heard had the ability to heal. This man laid his hands on that baby and prayed, and within 24 hours that baby is well and is still alive and has just had his own children, right? And you think, how does that work? Here's me as a non-Christian scratching my head saying, how does this work? Now, the interesting thing is that man who laid his hands on that baby has never been used to heal anybody else ever since.
So
interesting.
Yeah, and I guess that's there's these mysteries out there, right?
Yeah,
and,
it's no doubt about it.
But
you're a fool if you think that you understand.
So is this a fruitless line of research then, or is it something that you might consider in the future? Is because you seem to be focusing on creation when there's all these other areas of supernatural.
No doubt about it. You see, in our modern world, if we're victims of anything, we're victims of specialisation. Right, so that you go to university, you study 4 subjects in the first year, 2 or 3 by the time you get there, and by the time you've got your PhD, you study almost everything about almost nothing. Right, so there's no other way to do it at the present. So most of us have to become specialists.
Right.
God has not called me to investigate the paranormal. Right, I'm rather glad about that, right, because I've come across enough people in the occult to know that they need to get out of it. They're into darkness and into evil, and they pay a terrible price. But I'm not going to waste my time on that, because God has given me the gifts of being involved in geology, etc. So that's where I am.
And you went to school to be a geologist, so it kind of fits together,
it all fits together.
Okay. Can you kind of explain the difference to me, or if there is a difference in between intelligent design and creationism? Because it seems to me that intelligent design, that you kind of go one step further than the intelligent designer by positing that they're actually, that you know which God it is. It's Jehovah, the Judeo-Christian God. What makes you able to do that? I guess you said before your faith is what kind of...
Okay, well, again, just don't bring up faith as a abstract lump on this side of the line. Everybody's got that spectrum of faith. Right. Let's sort of illustrate that again. You can switch on the television, watch Canadian Broadcasting Company or Discovery Channel, and if it's a nature program, within 10 minutes you will have heard the word design over and over again. Isn't nature wonderful how it's designed this, right? Yeah. So design is not the issue. Everybody, blind Harry can recognise design if all he can do is hear. Because the birds talk to each other, the dogs talk to each other, right? There's a design feature that's actually happening out there. The explanation of where the design comes from is the one where faith, right, will actually begin to overlap. So that if you say Hume in England in the history of academia, his aim was to resurrect the old pagan philosophy that given long enough, every possible design would occur, including the bad ones, which would then be eliminated. So he had a naturalistic explanation, obviously by faith, because he wasn't there. All he could see was the existing successful designs. Then you get the guy who wrote the book on, watchmakers, and said, you see a watch, it implies a watchmaker, the design is intelligent. Okay, now from there on, of course, science has increasingly tried to leave God out or designer out. It's become a naturalistic explanation. So by the time we get to 2008, they just want to admit the design. Now you've got a group in the USA, and it's largely a USA phenomena, that says, well, we're not happy with that. It's not just random design, it's intelligent. Let's at least admit that, right? So every scientist who does his research doesn't walk into the lab hoping the design will become self-evident. He uses his brain to intelligently design even the things he's copying from nature, right? It's an intelligent design process.
Do you think that they use that term intelligent designer to kind of slip into the school system? Because it seemed like creationist, that was almost a swear word, or you couldn't use that around public school systems.
Well, you'll
so
find
they
the movie Expelled, of course, which has become pretty prominent in the USA. I don't know if it's hit Canada yet, but that's what that whole issue is about. Even when people say, we want to just admit intelligent design, they find themselves blacklisted, because that would imply an intelligent designer, and the rule is naturalistic without reference to God. So yes, it's become a political football, but as I like to tell the intelligent designers, if you're trying to play on the playing field that says no reference to God, you can't win, because intelligent design is not the consequences of naturalism. Random design is, right? So you can't win even at that level. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the creationists say, well, we can use this to sneak things in.
Right.
But I'm much more open than that. I think every student is entitled to know where I'm coming from, and is entitled to know where Richard Dawkins or anybody else is coming from, because if I don't tell them, then they are reaching the wrong conclusion because they haven't got all the information.
Okay, so let's talk about students first for a little bit. What are your views on education? Just in
That's
general.
a very broad switch.
I know that's
question.
okay. Well, I didn't really know where to begin asking about this. What's your view on science education? Should creationism be taught alongside evolutionism? Should we not teach evolutionism? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, when I first got involved in this issue, I discovered that, there is something far more controversial than sex education, and that's trying to teach students where sex came from. Because sex, its origin actually determines what you do with it. So if it just happened by itself, then there's males, there's females, and lately there's a third sort. Why are you Christians so upset about homosexuality? On the other hand, if God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Bruce, homosexuality is out right from the beginning, right? That's the end of the discussion. So there's all sorts of moral implications, even if all we're doing is discussing the physical origin of sex. So when you deal with this issue here, I found it far better to invent a course that was basically, how do we know what we know in the first place? How do we know if this is a theory? How do we know if that's a fact? Is it an opinion? Is it a religious influence? Is it a moral conclusion? How do we sort all that out? And as educators, that's a better approach. You're taking these students and you're teaching them how to think, not what to think. Right? But of course, in order to do that, you have to believe that man is logical and rational, and you've then got to be honest. Why do I believe that? If I do a 3-year course in psychology, I end up concluding the professor doesn't think he's rational. Right? So it's not based on our observation of human behaviour, it's actually a religious presupposition, and ultimately it's Christian. Right? We believe there is a God, we're made in his image, he's rational, we must be rational. If you think you're an over-evolved worm with bigger brains and less hair, worms aren't too rational.
Okay.